Welcome. Today we will walk through the powerful message written in the book of Isaiah. Isaiah was a prophet chosen by God to speak to his people. Through him, God revealed warnings, hope, judgment, and promises of redemption. These words were spoken to guide people back to God and to remind them that His mercy is greater than their failures. Let us begin. Long ago, during a time when kingdoms were rising and falling, and people often forgot the ways of God, a prophet named Isaiah was called to speak the truth. Isaiah lived among the people of Judah and Jerusalem, and through him God delivered messages of warning, correction, hope, and restoration. The people had once followed God faithfully, but over time many turned away. Their cities grew busy and prosperous, yet their hearts became distant from the one who had protected and guided them. They continued to bring offerings and sacrifices, believing their religious traditions alone were enough. But God saw deeper than outward actions. Through Isaiah, God spoke to the nation and said that He was tired of empty rituals that were not matched by justice and compassion. The people honored Him with ceremonies, yet they ignored the poor, neglected the weak, and allowed injustice to spread through the land. God called them to wash themselves from wrongdoing, to learn to do what is right, to defend the oppressed, to care for the fatherless, and to stand up for the widows. Despite their failures, God extended an invitation of mercy. He said that even though their sins were like scarlet, they could become white as snow. Even though their mistakes were deep and visible, they could be made clean again if they chose to return to Him with sincere hearts. This message showed that God's desire was not simply to punish, but to restore and renew His people. One day, Isaiah experienced a vision that changed his life forever. In this vision, he saw the Lord seated upon a throne high and exalted, and the temple was filled with the glory of God. Around the throne were heavenly beings calling out to one another, declaring that the Lord was holy and that His glory filled the entire earth. The sound of their voices shook the foundations of the temple, and smoke filled the room. In that moment, Isaiah realized how small and imperfect he was in comparison to the holiness of God. He cried out in fear, acknowledging that he was a man with unclean lips living in amongst those who also spoke wrongly. Yet instead of destroying him, God purified him. A burning coal was brought and touched to Isaiah's lips, symbolizing that his guilt was removed and his sin forgiven. Then Isaiah heard the voice of the Lord asking, "Whom shall I send, and who will go for us?" Isaiah responded with courage and willingness, saying, "Here am I, send me." From that moment forward, Isaiah became a messenger carrying God's words to the people. Isaiah's message was not always easy for the people to hear. He warned that turning away from God would bring consequences. Nations surrounding Judah were growing stronger, and political leaders often tried to rely on alliances and military power instead of trusting in God's protection. Isaiah reminded them that true security did not come from armies or wealth, but from faithfulness to God. He described how pride and corruption could weaken a nation from within. Leaders who abused their authority, judges who accepted bribes, and people who pursued selfish gain instead of righteousness were creating a society that was slowly collapsing. Isaiah's words painted a picture of a city that once stood for justice, but had become filled with dishonesty. Yet even in the middle of these warnings, hope appeared. Isaiah spoke of a future time when God would restore what had been broken. He described a vision of peace in which nations would know longer fight one another. Instead of preparing weapons for war, people would transform them into tools used for farming and building. This vision showed a world where people would learn the ways of God and walk in His light. Among Isaiah's prophecies were promises that pointed far beyond his own lifetime. He spoke about a coming leader who would bring true peace and justice. Isaiah described the birth of a child who would carry great authority and whose rule would never end. This child would be known as Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, and Prince of Peace. Through these words, Isaiah gave the people hope that God had not forgotten them, even though their present circumstances were difficult. A future filled with restoration and peace was being prepared. Isaiah continued to call the people to trust in God rather than fear the threats around them. Powerful empires rose across the region, and many believed survival depended on political strategies and alliances. But Isaiah warned that relying only on human strength would lead to disappointment. God alone was the true source of security. As time passed, Isaiah's message expanded beyond warnings and promises into deeper reflections about God's character. He reminded the people that God was not distant or indifferent to their suffering. When they felt forgotten, God assured them that He still remembered them. Isaiah described God as one who gives strength to the weary and increases the power of those who feel weak. Even young people, full of energy and determination, can grow tired and stumble, but those who place their trust in God will find renewed strength. They will rise up like eagles soaring high above the ground, running without growing weary and walking without fainting. These words became one of the most comforting messages in Isaiah's writings, reminding people in every generation that God's strength is greater than human weakness. Isaiah also spoke of a servant chosen by God to bring justice and healing. This servant would not seek attention or power in the way earthly rulers do. Instead, he would act with quiet strength and compassion. He would care for the weak and restore those who felt crushed by life's burdens. Yet Isaiah explained that this servant would also face rejection and suffering. Many would misunderstand him and turn away, but through his suffering, healing would come to others. This part of Isaiah's message revealed that God's plan for redemption often works through sacrifice and humility rather than through force or domination. Throughout the book, Isaiah repeatedly returned to the theme of God's unfailing love. He compared God's care to that of a parent who cannot forget a child. Even if such a thing were possible, God promised that He would never forget His people. Their names were engraved in His memory, and their future was held securely in His hands. Isaiah described a time when broken cities would be rebuilt, and people who once felt abandoned would again experience joy. The darkness that seemed overwhelming would be replaced by light, and the presence of God would guide the people forward. As Isaiah continued to speak to the people, he reminded them again and again that God was not only the creator of their nation, but the creator of the entire world. The mountains, the seas, the stars in the sky, and every living creature existed because of His power. Yet the people often turned their attention toward idols made by human hands. Craftsmen would cut down trees, shape the wood, cover it with gold or silver, and then bow before it as if it were a god. Isaiah pointed out the foolishness of this practice. A person might use part of a tree to cook food over a fire, and then use the remaining piece of wood to carve an idol and worship it. Through these examples, Isaiah showed that idols had no life, no power, and no ability to save anyone. Only the living God could guide the future and rescue His people from danger. Isaiah urged them to remember that God alone stretched out the heavens and laid the foundations of the earth. Nothing in creation existed without His command. At the same time, Isaiah warned the surrounding nations that their pride would not last forever. Many powerful kingdoms believed their strength made them invincible. Armies marched across lands. Kings built grand palaces, and rulers believed their authority would continue forever. But Isaiah declared that every nation is small compared to the greatness of God. The rise and fall of kingdoms are like a moment in history when measured against eternity. Those who rule with arrogance and cruelty will eventually face the consequences of their actions. Through these warnings, Isaiah revealed that justice belongs to God. Even when human leaders seem unstoppable, their power remains temporary, while God's authority continues forever. During this time, the people of Judah often felt afraid because stronger nations surrounded them. Threats of invasion and war created anxiety among the population. Many leaders believed they needed to form alliances with powerful empires in order to survive. Isaiah spoke strongly against this approach. He told them that placing their trust in political agreements instead of trusting in God would lead to disappointment. He reminded them that true security comes from faithfulness and obedience. If the people turned back to God, He would protect and guide them through the challenges they faced. But if they continued to rely only on human strength, they would experience hardship that could have been avoided. Isaiah also spoke words of comfort to those who felt discouraged by the situation around them. Some people looked at the corruption in their society and believed nothing could change. Others saw the strength of foreign armies and felt certain that destruction was inevitable. But Isaiah reminded them that God's plans extend far beyond the problems of the present moment. He described a future when God would restore what had been broken. Cities that once lay in ruins would be rebuilt. Communities that felt abandoned would become places of joy again. The people who had once lived in fear would experience peace and stability. One of the most powerful themes in Isaiah's message is the idea that God cares deeply about justice and compassion. He repeatedly called the people to defend those who were vulnerable. Wealth and success were not wrong by themselves, but when people gained wealth while ignoring the suffering of others, their prosperity became empty. Isaiah urged the people to create a society where fairness and kindness shaped every decision. He spoke about a future leader who would rule with perfect justice, making decisions not based on appearances, but on truth and wisdom. Under this leadership, the poor would be protected, the oppressed would be defended, and righteousness would guide the nation. Isaiah's writings also contain some of the most beautiful descriptions of hope found anywhere in the Bible. He described a time when the desert would blossom with life and color, when dry lands would become gardens filled with flowers and streams of water. These images symbolize the transformation that God would bring to His people. Situations that seemed hopeless could become places of new beginnings. Lives that felt empty could become full of purpose again. Isaiah encouraged the people to imagine a future where sorrow and sighing would fade away and joy would take their place. In another part of his message, Isaiah spoke about the greatness of God compared to the smallness of human understanding. He asked questions meant to remind the people of God's power. Who measured the waters of the earth in the hollow of His hand? Who marked off the heavens with the width of His fingers? Who understood the depths of God's wisdom? These questions were not meant to confuse people, but to inspire all. Isaiah wanted them to remember that the God who created the universe was more than capable of guiding their lives. When people focus only on their problems, those problems can feel overwhelming. But when they remember the greatness of God, they begin to see their situation differently. Isaiah continued by reminding the people that God never grows tired or weary. Human strength fades with time, but God's power remains constant. Even when people feel exhausted by life's challenges, God is able to renew their energy and restore their courage. Those who wait upon the Lord will find strength rising within them again. They will move forward with confidence, knowing that God is guiding their path. Another message Isaiah delivered spoke about God's servant who would bring light to the nations. This servant would not limit his mission to one group of people, but would bring hope to the entire world. Justice and truth would spread beyond borders, reaching those who had never known God before. This vision revealed that God's plan for redemption includes all nations and all people. The message of hope would travel far beyond the land where Isaiah first spoke these words. Isaiah also reminded the people that God's forgiveness is always available to those who sincerely seek Him. No matter how far someone has wandered, the door of mercy remains open. God invites people to return, to leave behind harmful choices, and to begin again with renewed hearts. This invitation shows the depth of God's patience and compassion. He does not desire the destruction of His people, but their restoration. As the message continued, Isaiah painted a picture of a future filled with peace and righteousness. Violence and injustice would not have the final word in history. Instead, God's truth and goodness would ultimately prevail. The nations would recognize His authority, and people from many cultures would come together to seek wisdom and guidance from Him. This vision encouraged the people to remain faithful even during difficult times, trusting that God's purposes were moving steadily toward fulfillment. As Isaiah continued delivering God's message, the tone of his words gradually shifted from warning to comfort. After long seasons of struggle, the people needed reassurance that God had not abandoned them. Isaiah spoke with powerful words meant to lift their spirits and renew their faith. He reminded them that even when circumstances seem dark, God is still present and still working. The people had experienced fear, uncertainty, and the consequences of their own choices. But Isaiah told them that their story was not finished. God's plans were greater than their failures, and His mercy was stronger than their mistakes. He called out to them with words of encouragement, telling them to prepare the way for the Lord and to make their hearts ready for a new beginning. Just as a road is cleared and made straight before a king arrives, Isaiah urged the people to remove the obstacles of pride, injustice, and unbelief from their lives. A new chapter of restoration was coming, and they needed to be ready to receive it. Isaiah described God as a shepherd who cares tenderly for his flock. A shepherd watches over every sheep, guiding them to safe paths and protecting them from danger. In the same way, God gently leads His people and carries those who are weak or weary. This image brought comfort to those who felt lost or overwhelmed by the difficulties around them. Isaiah reminded them that God does not rule with harshness, but with compassion and patience. His strength is great, yet His care is gentle. The same God who created the stars and placed them in the sky also watches closely over the lives of His people. To help the people understand the greatness of God, Isaiah asked them to look around at creation. The heavens stretch across the sky like a vast curtain, and the earth stands firmly because of God's design. Compared to the Creator of the universe, even the most powerful nations are like a drop of water in a bucket or dust on a scale. This comparison showed that the forces people feared were small in comparison to God's authority. No ruler, army, or empire could stand against the purposes of God. History moves forward according to His wisdom, not according to human ambition. Yet despite His great power, God remained close to His people. Isaiah reminded them that God never grows tired and never loses strength. Human beings often become exhausted when facing difficult situations, but God's energy and wisdom never diminish. When people feel weak or discouraged, they can receive new strength by trusting in Him. Isaiah described this renewal using a powerful image. Those who wait upon the Lord will rise up with wings like eagles. Eagles soar high above the ground, carried by strong winds that lift them upward. In the same way, God lifts those who trust Him above the burdens that once held them down. They will run without becoming weary, and walk without losing heart. because God's strength will sustain them. Isaiah also continued speaking about the servant chosen by God to accomplish an important mission. This servant would bring justice and truth to the world, but he would not accomplish his work through loud displays of power. Instead, he would act with quiet determination and compassion. A bruised reed he would not break, and a faintly burning wick he would not extinguish. These words painted a picture of someone who treats fragile and hurting people with care rather than harshness. The servant would help restore hope to those who felt broken by life. His mission would extend beyond a single nation, bringing light to people in many lands who had lived in spiritual darkness. As Isaiah continued speaking, he reminded the people again that idols were powerless. Many individuals still place their trust in objects made from wood, metal, or stone. Craftsmen spend hours shaping these objects, decorating them carefully, and setting them in special places for worship. Yet Isaiah explained that these idols could not see, hear, or speak. They could not guide anyone's future or protect anyone from danger. The people who created them were actually more powerful than the idols themselves, because they were the ones who shaped them. Isaiah urged everyone to turn away from such empty practices and return to the living God who truly holds power over life and history. Another important part of Isaiah's message focused on the idea that God's plans often unfold in surprising ways. Sometimes he chooses unexpected people to accomplish his purposes. Leaders who appear strong may fall, while individuals who seem unlikely may rise to positions of influence. Through these events, God demonstrates that history is not controlled solely by human ambition but guided by his wisdom. Isaiah encouraged the people to trust that even when they cannot see the full picture, God is still working behind the scenes to bring about his plans. Isaiah also described a beautiful invitation from God to all who felt spiritually empty. God called out to those who were thirsty, inviting them to come and receive water freely. This invitation symbolized the satisfaction and renewal that come from knowing God. Many people spend their lives chasing things that promise happiness but ultimately leave them feeling empty. Isaiah urged the people to listen carefully and seek what truly satisfies the soul. God offers life, purpose, and peace to those who turn toward him with sincere hearts. As the message continued, Isaiah described the power of God's word. Just as rain falls from the sky and waters the earth, causing plants to grow and produce fruit, God's word accomplishes the purpose for which it is sent. It never returns empty. When God speaks, his message brings transformation. Hearts can change, lives can be renewed, and communities can be restored because his word carries creative power. Toward the end of this section, Isaiah painted another picture of the future filled with joy and peace. Mountains and hills would seem to burst into song, and trees would clap their hands in celebration, instead of thorns and weeds growing in the land. Beautiful trees and plants would flourish. These images symbolize the complete renewal God promised to bring. Places that once represented hardship and pain would become signs of blessing and life. Through these messages, Isaiah continued to remind the people that their story was moving toward restoration. The struggles they faced were not the final chapter. God's plans included healing, justice, and joy beyond what they could imagine. If they remained faithful and trusted his guidance, they would witness a future brighter than anything they had experienced before. As Isaiah's message continued, he began to speak even more deeply about the plans of God for the future. The people had lived through fear, uncertainty, and times when it seems as though powerful nations controlled their destiny. But Isaiah reminded them that God was still guiding history according to his wisdom. Even when events appeared chaotic, nothing was outside of God's knowledge or authority. He explained that God could raise up leaders or bring them down, according to his purpose. Kingdoms might appear strong for a season, yet their power remained temporary compared to the eternal rule of God. Isaiah encouraged the people not to measure the future only by what they could see in the present moment. Human vision is limited, but God sees the end from the beginning. Because of this, His plans unfold with perfect understanding. Isaiah also spoke about how God continues to call His people back to Himself with patience and mercy. Again and again, God invited them to turn away from the choices that had led them into hardship. Instead of continuing down paths that created injustice and suffering, they were encouraged to seek righteousness, kindness, and humility. God promised that those who sincerely returned to Him would find forgiveness and restoration. The invitation was open to anyone willing to listen. Even those who felt far from God could begin again. Isaiah explained that God's thoughts are higher than human thoughts and His ways are greater than human ways. Just as the heavens stretch high above the earth, so God's understanding is far beyond the limits of human imagination. At this point, Isaiah described one of the most powerful images found in his writings. He spoke of a servant chosen by God who would carry out a mission of redemption. This servant would face rejection and suffering, yet through that suffering many people would receive healing and peace. The servant would not come with the appearance of worldly power or glory. Instead, he would experience hardship and misunderstanding. Many people would turn away from him, failing to recognize the significance of his mission. Yet Isaiah revealed that this suffering would not be meaningless. The servant would carry the burdens of others and bring restoration where brokenness had once ruled. Isaiah explained that the servant would bear griefs and carry sorrows. He would experience wounds, yet through those wounds healing would come to many. The servant would willingly accept suffering so that others could be restored. This prophecy became one of the most profound messages in the entire book because it revealed that redemption would come through sacrifice rather than through force. Instead of conquering enemies with armies, the servant would overcome darkness through humility, love, and obedience to God's will. As Isaiah continued, he reassured the people that their suffering would not last forever. God promised to rebuild what had been destroyed and to restore joy where sorrow once existed. He described a future in which the people would once again feel secure in their land and confident in God's presence among them. Cities that had been damaged would rise again with strength and beauty. Communities that had once been scattered would gather together and flourish. These promises gave hope to those who felt discouraged by their present circumstances. Isaiah also described God's love using images that were deeply personal and comforting. He compared God's care to that of a mother who cannot forget the child she has carried. Even if such a thing were possible, God said He would never forget His people. Their names were written in His memory, and their future remained secure in His hands. Through these words, Isaiah wanted the people to understand that God's relationship with them was not distant or temporary. His love remained constant even when they struggled or lost their way. Another powerful promise appeared as Isaiah described the renewal of the land itself. Deserts would become fertile places filled with water and life. Fields would produce abundant harvests. Trees would grow where once there had only been a dry ground. These images symbolize the transformation God intended not only for the land, but also for the hearts of His people. Where there had once been spiritual dryness and emptiness, God would bring growth, renewal, and joy. Isaiah also reminded the people that God's salvation was not meant for one nation alone. The message of hope would eventually reach people from many cultures and lands. Nations that had once been distant would come to recognize the greatness of God. They would seek wisdom and guidance from Him, and they would learn to walk in His ways. This vision revealed that God's plan included the entire world. The light of truth would shine far beyond the borders of Israel and reach every corner of the earth. As Isaiah continued speaking, he returned once more to the theme of trust. He reminded the people that fear often grows when individuals focus only on the threats around them. But when they place their confidence in God, they discover a deeper peace that circumstances cannot destroy. Isaiah encouraged them to remember all the times God had guided and protected them in the past. The same God who had delivered them before would remain faithful in the future. Toward the end of this section, Isaiah described a joyful celebration that would take place when God's restoration was complete. The people who had once felt ashamed or discouraged would rejoice again. Their voices would rise in songs of gratitude, and their lives would become examples of God's faithfulness. Instead of despair, they would experience hope. Instead of fear, they would live with confidence. God's presence among them would bring peace that extended into every area of their lives. Through these words, Isaiah continued building a vision of a future shaped by justice, mercy, and the unchanging love of God. The difficulties the people faced were real, but they were not permanent. God's plans were moving forward step by step, guiding history toward a moment when restoration, peace, and righteousness would fill the earth. As Isaiah's message moved toward its later chapters, the prophet began speaking even more about restoration and renewal. The people had lived through seasons of disappointment, exile, fear, and uncertainty. Yet Isaiah reminded them that God's purpose was always greater than their present suffering. God had not created his people to remain in despair forever. Instead, he intended to rebuild their lives and restore their joy. Isaiah described a time when the people who once felt abandoned would experience God's presence again in a powerful way. Nations would notice the transformation taking place and would recognize that God was the one who had restored them. The cities that once stood in ruins would rise again, and communities that had felt scattered would become strong and united once more. Isaiah wanted the people to see that even when destruction had touched their land, God still had the power to rebuild what had been broken. Isaiah continued by explaining that true restoration begins within the heart. It is not only the rebuilding of cities or the return of prosperity that matters most, but the renewal of the spirit. When people return to God with humility and sincerity, they begin to experience a deeper transformation. Their thoughts change, their priorities shift, and their lives begin to reflect compassion and justice. Isaiah encouraged the people to seek this inner renewal, reminding them that God values a humble and sincere heart more than outward displays of religion. True faith is revealed through kindness, fairness, and the willingness to care for those who are struggling. One of the most powerful sections of Isaiah's message speaks about bringing good news to those who feel broken. Isaiah described a mission to comfort the hurting, to heal the brokenhearted, and to proclaim freedom for those who feel trapped by suffering or injustice. These words painted a picture of hope reaching into the darkest places of human experience. Those who mourn would one day experience joy. Those who had lived in despair would receive a new sense of purpose and strength. Instead of ashes, they would receive beauty. Instead of mourning, they would experience gladness. Instead of discouragement, they would be clothed with praise and confidence. Isaiah explained that the people who experienced this restoration would become like strong trees, planted by God himself. Their lives would stand as evidence of his faithfulness. They would rebuild the places that had long been destroyed and restore communities that had suffered for generations. Through them, others would see the goodness of God and understand that his plans are always moving toward renewal and life. The prophet also spoke about the joy that would fill the hearts of the people when they recognized how deeply God loved them. Instead of feeling rejected or forgotten, they would understand that God had chosen them and called them his own. Their relationship with him would become a source of lasting celebration. Isaiah compared this joy to the happiness of a bride and groom on their wedding day, when hope and excitement fill the air. In the same way, the people would rejoice because they knew God was near to them and committed to their future. Isaiah then described how God would establish righteousness and justice in a way that the entire world could see. Nations that had once ignored or opposed God would begin to recognize his wisdom and authority. People from many lands would seek guidance from him, wanting to learn how to live with fairness and compassion. The influence of God's truth would spread beyond borders and cultures, bringing light to places that had long lived in spiritual darkness. Throughout these promises, Isaiah continued reminding the people that God's faithfulness never changes. Human circumstances may shift, and generations may rise and fall, but God's commitment to his promises remains constant. When he speaks, his word does not fail. The plans he sets in motion continue until they are fulfilled. Because of this, Isaiah encouraged the people to live with confidence rather than fear. Even when the future seemed uncertain, they could trust that God's purposes were still unfolding. As Isaiah approached the closing chapters of his message, he spoke about a new future that would surpass anything the people had previously experienced. He described a renewed creation where peace and harmony would replace conflict and suffering. In this vision, life would flourish and communities would thrive. People would live without constant fear, and their work would bring fulfillment instead of frustration. The blessings of God would touch every part of life, creating a world where justice and compassion guide human relationships. Isaiah explained that this new future would reveal the glory of God to all people. Nations would come together to witness what God had done, and many would choose to follow his ways. The story that began with warnings and correction would end with hope and renewal. God's desire had always been to restore rather than destroy, to heal rather than abandon. Through patience, mercy, and faithful guidance, he continued leading his people toward a future filled with peace. By the time Isaiah finished delivering his message, the people had heard both the seriousness of God's warnings and the beauty of his promises. They understood that their choices mattered, but they also realized that God's mercy was always available to those willing to return to him. The book of Isaiah closes with a vision that looks forward to a time when God's justice and peace will shape the entire world, reminding every generation that the story of redemption is still unfolding. God calls every heart that feels lost and says, "Come now and return to me, because no matter how deep your mistakes may be, I have the power to make you clean again. Even when your life feels stained by regret, I can make it white like snow. Do not believe the lie that you are forgotten or abandoned, because I have written your name on the palms of my hands, and I will never forget you. When you feel weak and tired from carrying the weight of life, remember that I give strength to the weary and power to the weak. Those who wait upon me will renew their strength. They will rise up on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not faint. Do not be afraid of the future, because I am the Lord who goes before you and makes a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. When darkness surrounds you, remember that I am your light and your salvation, and no darkness can overcome the light that comes from me. Even when mountains shake and hills fall away, my love for you will never be removed, and my promise of peace will never fail. I am the one who created the heavens and the earth, the one who holds the stars in place, and the same power that formed the universe is able to restore your life. So lift your eyes, take courage, and trust in me, because I'm doing a new thing, something greater than you have seen before. What seems impossible to you is never impossible for me, and the future I am preparing is filled with hope, restoration, and life. Do not fear, because God himself says that he has called you by a name, and you belong to him. When you walk through deep waters, they will not overwhelm you, and when you pass through the fire, it will not consume you. The struggles you face are not stronger than the God who stands beside you. Even in the hardest seasons of life, his presence remains with you, guiding you step by step toward a future you cannot yet see. Lift your eyes and remember who created the heavens, and placed every star in its place. The same God who holds the universe together also knows your heart and understands your struggles. He never grows tired, and his wisdom never fails. When your strength runs out, his strength begins, and he will carry you forward when you feel unable to move another step. God invites every searching heart with a powerful promise. Come to the waters and receive freely. You do not need wealth or status to receive what God offers. His mercy is given freely to those who seek him. When you listen to his voice and turn your heart toward him, your soul will find life, peace, and a purpose that nothing else in the world can provide. Sometimes people feel forgotten, as if their prayers are unheard and their struggles unseen. But God declares that even if a mother could forget her child, he will never forget you. Your life is precious to him, and your story matters. Even in moments when you feel invisible to the world, you are fully seen and deeply known by God. There are times when life feels like a wilderness, a place where hope seems dry and direction feels lost. Yet God promises that he can make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. The situations that appear impossible are the very places where God demonstrates his power to transform darkness into hope and emptiness into abundance. God reminds his people that the past does not have to define the future. He says not to dwell only on former things, because he is doing something new. Even now a new path is being prepared. The mistakes, failures, and disappointments of yesterday do not control what God can accomplish tomorrow. When the world feels unstable and everything around you seems uncertain, remember that God's love is stronger than anything that can change or collapse. Mountains may move and hills may shake, but his love will never leave you. His promise of peace stands firm even when life feels unpredictable. Those who feel exhausted from the pressures of life are reminded that God renews the strength of those who trust in him. Instead of remaining trapped in discouragement, they will rise up with new energy and courage. Like eagles carried by the wind high above the earth, they will discover strength beyond their own ability. God calls people not only to believe in him but also to live lives filled with justice and compassion. True faith is shown through kindness, fairness, and the willingness to help those who are struggling. When people choose to care for the broken and defend the oppressed, they reflect the heart of God to the world around them. The message of Isaiah ultimately points toward hope. God promises a future where joy replaces sorrow and restoration replaces destruction. The darkness that once seemed overwhelming will not have the final word. God's light will shine, and those who trust him will experience a future filled with peace, renewal, and lasting hope. After hearing these words and promises spoken through the prophet Isaiah, let your heart remember that the message of God has always been a message of restoration, mercy, and hope. From the beginning, God called his people to return to him, not with fear, but with trust, because his desire was never to destroy, but to restore. Even when people wandered far away, his voice continued to call them back, reminding them that his mercy is greater than their failures and his love is stronger than their mistakes. The message of Isaiah reveals that God sees every struggle, every tear, and every hidden burden carried in the hearts of people. He is the one who strengthens the weary, lifts the broken, and guides those who feel lost in the wilderness of life. When the world seems uncertain and the future feels unclear, these words remind us that God is still the one who holds the stars in their place and directs the course of history with wisdom and purpose. No darkness can overcome the light that comes from him, and no situation is too broken for his power to restore. Isaiah speaks of a God who makes paths where none existed before, who brings water to dry deserts, and who transforms places of sorrow into places of joy. These promises show that God's plans are always moving toward renewal and life, even when people cannot yet see the full picture. The prophet also reminds us that God's love is constant and unchanging. Even when mountains move and hills disappear, His love remains steady. Even when people feel forgotten, He declares that their names are written in His memory and that they're never out of His sight. The same God who created the heavens and the earth continues to care deeply about every human life. He calls people to walk in justice, compassion, and humility, reflecting His goodness in the way they treat others. Isaiah's message shows that true strength is not found in power or wealth, but in trusting God and living according to His truth. Those who wait upon the Lord will renew their strength, rising above their burdens like eagles carried by the wind. They will move forward with courage because they know that God walks beside them through every season of life. As this journey through the words of Isaiah comes to an end, remember that the story does not truly end here. The promises spoken long ago continue to inspire hope today. God is still calling hearts to return to Him, still offering forgiveness, still bringing light into darkness, and still guiding those who seek Him with sincere faith. Every person who listens to these words has the opportunity to begin again, to trust God more deeply, and to walk forward with renewed strength and purpose. The message of Isaiah is a reminder that no life is beyond restoration, and no future is beyond hope when placed in God's hands. So carry these words with you. When you face uncertainty, remember that God is the one who makes a way in the wilderness. When you feel weak, remember that He renews the strength of those who trust Him. When you feel forgotten, remember that His love will never leave you. And when you look toward the future, remember that God is always working to bring light, peace, and restoration into the world. May these words remain in your heart and guide you toward faith, courage, and hope, today and always. Heavenly Father, we come before You with grateful hearts after hearing the powerful words spoken through the book of Isaiah. Lord, You are the creator of the heavens and the earth, the one who holds every star in its place, and the one who knows every heart that is listening right now. Thank You for reminding us through these words that Your love never fails and Your mercy never runs out. Even when we feel weak, tired, or lost, You are the God who gives strength to the weary and hopes to those who feel broken. Father, we ask that You touch every person who is watching and listening to this message. For those who are carrying heavy burdens, bring them peace. For those who feel discouraged, fill them with new strength. For those who feel forgotten, remind them that they are never forgotten by You. Lord, help us to trust You even when the path ahead is unclear. Because You are the one who makes a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. Teach us to walk in Your truth, to live with kindness and justice, and to follow the path that leads to life. Renew our hearts, strengthen our faith, and guide our steps every day. May the promises spoken through Isaiah remain alive in our hearts, reminding us that Your plans are always greater than our fears, and Your light is always stronger than the darkness. We place our lives into Your hands and trust in Your goodness today and forever. In Your holy name we pray. Amen.